Allan Evans is the CEO of Unusual Machines, and we're very excited to say Allan is taking the time out of his very busy schedule to join us here for a one-on-one interview. Allan, great to have you.
I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start with the basics here, especially for any of our viewers might be a bit unfamiliar with the work you and your colleagues do at Unusual Machines. How do you see your company fitting into the so-called drone economy right now in the U.S.?
Yeah, we build drone parts. So we've been trying to onshore a bunch of parts. There's all these really great drone companies that are changing everything, and they need suppliers. So we look at it that way. It's very simply, just onshoring the parts.
To that point, a few really exciting acquisitions, companies with some really cool names, I got to admit. Fat Shark, Rotor Riot, how do those companies fit into your overall strategic picture recently?
Yeah, so that's we started with those, like we IPO'd and brought them in, and they really are consumer drone parts businesses, particularly for FPV. So in the industry where you wear the goggles. And what we have is this e-commerce business, Rotor Riot, where if you were going to go fly drones in your backyard, you'd go buy an FPV kit and put it together. We realized we're selling like 20,000 motors, 8,000 drone flight computers, all these things to customers. So then by moving away from China and moving to USA made components that we make or source ourselves, we can be our own first customer. And in doing that, we can hit the volumes necessary to pass the savings on to not just our customers, but any enterprises that buy from us, like US government agencies, and really overcome that, how do you get to 10,000 of a thing barrier?
So you mentioned China, obviously, in terms of artificial intelligence, we got this kind of current AI Cold War going on. Obviously, the big story of the week here, DeepSeek contributing to the wiping out of some $600 billion in NVIDIA value alone earlier this week. How does China's progress on drones compare to that of the United States?
Way ahead. The Chinese company, particularly DJI in the small drone category, dominated the entire world. I mean, amazing. And so this is one case where we're playing catch up, and we're playing catch up not just on the final product in a lot of ways, but also on the whole supply chain, because they dominated the industry. Millions of drone motors and millions of flight computers and millions of all those things were being made in particularly in the Shenzhen area of China. And so, really appreciate a lot of the legislation sort of kicking them out. So we have the ability to really play catch up in the domestic marketplace.
So to that point, the legislation we did have from former President Joe Biden helping lead that effort here to essentially ban Chinese drone makers like DJI. Were you in support of that particular push from the former White House? And is it your expectation that the Trump administration will continue with that push?
So I would say the American Security Drone Act, which was part of that push, was approved unanimously through the Senate and was actually introduced by Stefanik, who is now, part of the Trump administration. So I think this is one of the places where everybody, red, blue, they all agree. They all think, hey, we need to really support the domestic drone ecosystem and build it out. And if you look at the new Secretary of Defense, he's pro-drone, Elon's pro-drone. I think you see everybody realizing this is a big deal, and it not even being a political football, but just being a necessary thing.
But it's not just pro-drone, it's pro-American manufactured drone, correct? And why is that so important to the overall equation?
The easy way I look at it from a defense perspective is if you have great drones, but none of the drone parts, or you're not making them yourself, it's like having great guns and no bullets. Like if something comes up, you just don't have the supply for it. And we saw some of these issues in like a smaller scale during COVID with vaccine allocation or even with toilet paper. And so I think there's a real concern that if there's not an American base for drones, then there won't be American drones when we need them the most.
What's your understanding, your thought about exactly why the U.S. fell so far behind China in the last decade in this space, specifically as drones are used for military operations?
Yeah, weirdly, it's this really positive aspect of America that caused us to fall behind. We have this free market economy. So competition comes in, everybody fights it out. About 7 years ago, 3D Robotics, GoPro, and DJI were all trying to be in Best Buy. And DJI just had the better product at a better price. And so, capitalism was used against us to scale up something that was at the time considered a toy. And then it wasn't really till the conflict in Ukraine or a little bit before that, we realized these were tools, not toys. And so I think it was just like, us allowing capitalism to work. in a place that we didn't realize was maybe as sensitive as we've come to realize it.
A short time after the election in November, you announced Donald Trump Jr. joining your advisory board. He is also, Allan, if I'm not mistaken, the second largest shareholder in the company. What does Don Jr. bring to the role?
Yeah, we were talking to him long before the election, and what he brings is a really deep awareness from a business perspective into other groups, other people that are really interested in bringing production back to America. You know, he sits with 1789 Capital, so there's this really deep understanding of how the investor markets work for strategics. And then he also has really great reach to a bunch of people who share the same beliefs, you know, through his social media followers and through what he's written. So we're really excited that he can help just connect us to some of those businesses and customers in the enterprise marketplace that share our values. And so that's been great.
Allan, I got to ask you the obvious question that a lot of people out there have been speculating about. Did you add Donald Trump Jr. to your advisory board simply so that Unusual Machines could be in a position to get better government contracts under the Trump administration?
No. We, in fact, don't go after government contracts. We explicitly say it all the time. We try to sell to other companies that have government contracts. It's called dual use. So if you walk around and talk to government employees and ask for their cell phone, they'll hand you like a Samsung S20 or an S23. And it's because Samsung makes all these amazing things for the much larger market that the quality, the cost, everything else is there. And we're built in the same way as a business. So I think we're a great match with what he does because we only sell to other companies, not to the government. And he believes in drones and American-made drones as the future. And so there's not really any conflict or any crossover into the government there at all.
How do you see the company benefiting either from a Trump presidency or this new look Congress? Obviously, you mentioned Elise Stefanik earlier. I got to imagine you got a lot of Republican supporters on Capitol Hill, but you know as well as I do, it's a really narrow margin there for the GOP in terms of gavel control on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. So what do those kind of legislative opportunities, political opportunities look like for you and the company in this new look administration and Congress?
I think just having unification from the president all the way through is going to drive more action than if there was a split. I think everybody sees robotics and drones as part of the future and a lower cost future when compared to like tanks or jets. And so I think it matches the idea of modernizing the warfighter, modernizing government over some of the maybe ways that we're going before. And I really think that's going to drive macro allocation toward robotics, where drones and drone parts are a big part of it. I also think you see a real effort to onshore from the administration and to use tariffs or other economic policies to facilitate what they're trying to do, like you just saw with Colombia. And so I think in doing that, there's going to be a really friendly environment for some of the onshoring production that we're trying to do that'll give us a little bit of an economic competitive advantage over people that aren't going to be compliant.
Allan, what's the coolest part about working with drones?
Oh, you know, for me, that we make micros and we have a kit on our website, rotoriot.com, and you put on a headset and you go whipping around your house in the middle of the winter if you're in New York, and you feel like you're like shrunk down and just flying through a space that and it lets you see it in a whole different way. So the coolest part is that whenever you fly a drone, you get this surreal perspective of a thing that you're so familiar with that is at the same time brand new. And that's just, I don't know, it doesn't stop hitting this, you know, the back of your brain with sort of wonder, like I'm 10.
Yeah, I see you light up as I ask that question, and that's why I always like talking with CEOs and people in your position just about that base passion that you have for it. For our viewers who might be a bit unfamiliar, how did you get into this?
Oh, I was a startup kid and I did VR headsets way back. So if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley, the headsets in season 4 were the first prototypes I built. I was over in China doing headsets all the time and then got into headsets for drones.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Back to the geopolitics about this, because, you know, as you kind of marry on your passions you just laid out with some of the legislative realities on Capitol Hill, I wonder how global conflicts, specifically like in Ukraine, where we know that drone warfare is so important, how has that impacted any urgency or demand from the U.S. government? And how do you expect your company to play an increasingly more important role in that?
It's changed the whole world. It's changed not just supply chain or demand, but also perception. So I'd start by saying the conflict in Ukraine, and a little more less so, but also in Israel, has caused people to stop looking at drones as toys, the smaller ones, and really look at them as tools. We're not going back from that. I mean, that ship has now sailed, changed our minds. At the same time, in our size category, the backpack size drones, Ukraine alone is building 4 million of them this year. Okay, that's just a huge chunk of demand that has mostly been serviced by China, but China as a government is trying to restrict exports there. So it creates this huge demand driver for value parts that we're seeing. And it's completely changed tactics. Like one of the things that blows my mind is you don't see videos of helicopters from the conflict in Ukraine. And when we were young and you were watching stuff on Vietnam, it was all helicopters. So it's already completely changed that paradigm in conflict. And so I think we're just at the edge of this whole new wave of technologies and behaviors that are going to come with drones. And I think militaries and governments, police, even firefighting, everybody's going to really incorporate more and more of this into what they're doing over the next 20 years.
What do you see as being some of the biggest tailwinds and headwinds, the opportunities and the challenges of the space you're in, especially relative to any competitors? We've done a handful of these interviews. I know you're partnering with groups like Red Cat and several others, but I got to imagine for this nascent industry, Allan, we're going to kind of go from 0 to 60 or however fast a drone flies proverbially here in terms of a lot of entrants into the space. So how do you fit into that, and what do you kind of view as those opportunities, but also some of those things that might be a bit of a headwind?
Yeah, I'd say the opportunities were public, and I think you're going to see consolidation. So we're a natural consolidator. I mean, if we weren't having those conversations right now, you should judge me if you're a shareholder. So I think we look forward to all the competitors coming in because it lets us figure out who does good and go see how curious they are about being part of a public company. I think that's actually a huge advantage for where we sit. I do think a tailwind is going to be any of the things that occur in public, like, the DJI, the Chinese drone that hit the firefighting airplane during the Palisades fire. That causes hesitation in domestic adoption. And I think there's going to be navigating those instances can create headwinds. I think you're going to see less of that in conflict where people are willing to take more risk. But where I see the really big market is the domestic market. And the use of everything from delivering burritos to one of the coolest, weirdest applications is they use them to wash windows on skyscrapers. So like people don't have to lower themselves. It costs 30% of the time and money to clean a skyscraper with a drone than like traditionally.
All right, that's awesome, because when I do see people out there doing that, I get so nervous for them. Like, I'm filled with anxiety when I watch humans doing that, so that's good to see we can kind of automate some of that anxiety-producing work there. You mentioned the shareholder thing. You actually trade here with NYSE American, so you're in the New York Stock Exchange family, so it's great to be here and do this interview with you. This was really interesting to me. You recently sent out the shareholder letter. You were warning about unusual machines being a short target. I wonder how that situation has developed since that letter, and do you get the sense that short sellers are still targeting your stock? And to be fair, your stock, I mean, we're doing this interview on January 28th. You are down, the stock is down about 26% or so from the start of the year.
So that came about, I think we had pretty good information that there was going to be a more politically motivated sort of short piece out there, and that is we thought it was fair to get in front of that and at least highlight what we're doing to not get into some sort of political muddiness. I think legitimate shorting is part of the regulation of the market. I think people can bet or not bet on different companies in whatever way they want. So I appreciate the market dynamics as regulatory. I think if you look at the drone sector as a whole, a lot of companies are down about the same amount. So I don't feel like we're being unfairly punished over anyone else if you look at it from the start of January. And I think it might be a natural pullback. We're about to see a corner where it rips forward. I think a lot of people are still on the sidelines. They're like, what's the new administration going to do? Where's the money going to come from? How's it all look? And to me, it's a really good time to be here because once it's known, then you don't get any of the benefit of taking a little more risk.
Finally, what most excites you as the CEO of Unusual Machines for what the year ahead means for your company?
A couple of things. I'm really excited that we sort of, the 1 year anniversary is February 14th from when I was in the room you're in, and it's amazing. But I think going forward, this is going to be a year of massive growth, both organic and inorganic. And I'm really excited to see how fast we can really contribute to bringing this industry that's so important back to America. So I'm pretty pumped to work with all the people we have right now and all the people we're going to bring in to get some really interesting things done.
A Valentine's Day anniversary here at the New York Stock Exchange. That is Allan Evans. Allan is the CEO of Unusual Machines. Congratulations on all of the success you and your colleagues have had with the company, and best of luck on the path forward. Allan, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us today.
I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.
You too.